Now let's talk about losing the ranch. So your family, talk about the Obama era program that caused this to happen. Really a tragedy.
It was crazy because, we all saw the turning point after 9/11, the economy taking the hit, then the kind of us, trudging through, and things really took off. And I remember after the crash, I graduated in 2006 from high school as a point of reference. And, at that point in time, you're in your college years, you're working, going to class. I was an athlete in college. And so I was really not in tune to all the things that were going on. Of course, when the crash comes and happens, everyone across, not just the country, but the world is impacted and things get really bad. And I remember I was trying to help my mom make mortgage payments, and I was seeing just how because again, I watched my mom struggle.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, welcome to another episode of American Potential. Thanks for being with us. We always like to have great policy champions on with us, and today is no exception. Today's guest learned the value of hard work from being a third-generation commercial sandblaster, which was her family's business. And this is also where she saw how the government can affect a small business. She saw her mom pay her workers first, which meant sometimes there was nothing left for them. Her family ultimately lost the ranch they lived on due to an Obama-era program. So when she was trying to figure out her next step, she had someone ask her to get into politics by running a campaign. She'd never worked in politics before that time, but she figured, why not give it a shot? She moved from Colorado to Florida. Now, this journey's led her to being the deputy chief of staff for nearly a decade for Florida's 3rd Congressional District. And in 2020, she was elected as the representative for that district. In the 117th Congress, she was ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee and served on the House Agricultural Committee and now on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I want to welcome Congresswoman Kat Cammack to the show. Congresswoman,
thanks.
How are you?
I'm good. I might take you on the road with me. That's a great introduction.
There you go. Well, that's good. Well, listen, I have to do it for a hometown friend of mine. I mean, we I guess, kind of grew up close to each other. It
Absolutely.
sounds like, right?
Yep, Castle
From
Rock.
Colorado, you're from Castle Rock, kind of Castle Rock area.
Yep.
And I live in Colorado Springs. So tell us about your growing up there.
Well, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, growing up, in Colorado, you basically are born skiing or snowboarding, right. The thing that I appreciate now about our dry heat, as versus living in the South,
yes, right.
Where humidity can basically kill anything, is you could style your hair and it would stay the same for a week. No, it was a great upbringing. I grew up on a very small cow-calf operation. We had chickens and dogs, and I was in 4-H and, showed chickens in 4-H. Went to Douglas County High School and, go Huskies. It was great. But, we were very blue collar, working class.
Yeah.
Daughter of a single mom. We had addiction issues in the family, alcoholism. And that was a strain, And then, of course, watching my mom run our family business, which was commercial sandblasting, that was tough because as you said, when you're a small business owner, you do it all. Your sales, your marketing, your operations, you're the toilet bowl cleaner,
right.
You're the whole thing. And, I started sweeping up and mopping floors in our family business down in Denver as a kid. And so I watched my mom really work hard and struggle. And I attribute my work ethic to her. That is something that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Yeah. But I also witnessed firsthand, without really knowing what was happening at the time, how big government is strangling the life out of our small businesses.
Right.
And, I didn't know my dad. And so it really was just my mom. She was mom and dad. And, I would joke that, I would see people from OSHA or EPA or the DOL or, just
right.
these bureaucrats coming in and out. And they were always seemingly looking for a home for some ridiculous regulation, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And my mom growing up, she was She was a registered Democrat, but always said, I vote for the person, not for the party,
Sure.
and it was always about, who she thought would do the better job. And so it wasn't a political household by any means. We weren't politically connected. We weren't donating money to anybody. Never went to rallies or did anything like that. But we voted, my mom voted. Sure. And then when I became of age to vote, I actually registered as an independent because I did not like the party fighting, the Republicans and Democrats. And so I ultimately was voting Republican my whole life. But it was really interesting because I just started being conditioned from a very young age without the political labels of the dangers of big government and how it really will take away your dream, your livelihood, all the things that your family is trying to do. And, whether you're Republican or Democrat, politically involved or not, like you are going to feel the wrath of big government in one way or another.
Yeah.
And so, I was the first in my family to go to college. Metro State, go Roadrunners, beep, beep. Graduated, but I was actually in my last month of college when we got the call that we were losing our ranch.
Yeah.
And that was really hard because at the time, I was working multiple jobs, trying to graduate, trying to help my mom, and then all hell breaks loose. And so that was really the beginning of my political journey.
And I want to talk about that, but before we get to losing the ranch, I want to remind folks, first of all, a lot of people think that members of Congress all come from the Rockefeller clan or something like that, right? And some do, right? That's definitely true. But I think people can see from you that, that's the American dream. Like you probably growing up when you were the mutton busting champion for the state of Colorado at age 6.
Yes.
Right? That's pretty cool. Did you think then, that you would ever be a member of Congress?
Oh gosh, no. No, actually my dream as a kid was, I wanted to be a CEO. I wanted to be in business like my mom.
Right.
And I'll never forget one Christmas, I got this business kit.
Yeah.
And it was a purple briefcase and it had all kinds of, fancy papers in it.
Right.
And I called my business The Great Big Company. And I would go around and I would, it was probably stealing looking back. But at the time I was borrowing, like my mom's clothes and things around the house. I would collect them, and then they would be looking for them. And I'd be like, I have a store. And I would sell them back to them. And, so that was my dream. I wanted to be in business. And it's tough looking back now because at the time, again, you're not politically engaged in that way as a kid. And, your family's not politically engaged. And all you see are the struggles, and the frustrations, and you start to ask yourself why. And it's pretty crazy because I tell people all the time, I don't see people like me in Congress, and people like me traditionally have never made it to Congress. That's the American dream right there, being able to come from absolutely nowhere, no political connections, no money, none of that. And you can do something pretty interesting.
Well, and
impactful.
I hope there's a 6-year-old girl somewhere, mutton busting champion of
absolutely
Colorado or Wyoming or wherever, who looks at this story and that's an inspiration. So you are an inspiration, hopefully, to young girls, young boys everywhere to see that they can do this too.
Well, and for all the folks that are listening and watching right now, mutton busting, because this is always the follow-up question.
Okay.
What is mutton busting?
Okay. What is mutton busting? I'll set you up.
But back in my day, wow, that really, we didn't have safety measures.
You're supposed to say, back in my day.
I know, back in my day when we walked to school in 8 miles barefoot. No, when I was mutton busting, no helmets, like no safety gear. You wore your cute little Western shirt with your jeans, your belt buckle, and I'll never forget my mom. We were like Goodwill, thrifters and stuff like that. And so I had like this, this little cowboy shirt that was too big for me. It was a boy's shirt. And they put me on the devil sheep. This thing was insane. You ride sheep, basically. You put little kids on top of sheep. You put them in the chute, the buck and chute, and they just let you run. And then if the sheep don't move, then the clowns, they chase you to get them going.
Yes.
And you just hold on for dear life. And I'll never forget, I got the biggest sheep ever, and it was pissed. It was so mad. And it was legitimately like fussing and doing all kinds of stuff in the shoot. And my mom looks at me and I was so excited. I was like, this is going to be so much fun. And I did. I held on. And I had a very, very storied but short mutton busting career. I think it lasted all of a year.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, all right. Now let's talk about losing the ranch. So your family, talk about the Obama era program that caused this to happen. Really a tragedy.
Mm-hmm. It was crazy because, we all saw the turning point after 9/11, the economy taking the hit, then the kind of us, trudging through, then things really took off. And I remember after the crash, I graduated in 2006 from high school as a point of reference. And, at that point in time, you're in your college years, you're working, going to class. I was an athlete in college. And so I was really not in tune to all the things that were going on. Of course, when the crash comes and happens, everyone across, not just the country, but the world is impacted and things get really bad. And I remember I was trying to help my mom make mortgage payments, and I was seeing just how because again, I watched my mom struggle really our whole lives. She would pay everybody before she would pay herself. And, that's something that every business owner knows. I really feel that that's something that they know. Sure. They're the last ones to get paid. So we weren't special in that regard. But when the crash happened, we had a mortgage that I think was maybe $1,700 a month, I think. I'm trying to remember back. And there were all these advertisements, letters in the mail coming, all these things saying, there's no government program out there that's been passed. You refinance and you'll lower your mortgage payment and you'll lower your rate. And I don't even think our rate was terrible at the time. But it was just one of those things that was really being pushed. And, you're seeing it on the news. And so my mom, she's like, I think we should refinance. Little did we know that the program that Obama and Congress had passed was really quite the dirty deed that both Republicans and Democrats had done together. The way the bill was written, passed in the dead of night, was it incentivized the banks to get people into refinancing their loans. There was no real criteria whatsoever. The bank became judge and jury on whether a loan could be deemed savable. That was the word. And there was, again, no real criteria surrounding it. And so if the bank determined that the loan was unsavable, despite whether you had made every payment in the book, if you had missed, whatever, they had final say. The federal government would give a tax credit to the bank for the loan.
Wow.
And so it doesn't take a genius to realize that at that point, bankers all around the country, and especially the big guys, they were saying, well, why the heck would we wait 30 years to collect interest on the loan when we can collect it up front?
Yeah, incredible.
And so, it became this giant, essentially Ponzi scheme where they were instituting processes within every brokerage and bank where, you have to email this paperwork. This one has to be faxed. This has to be, you didn't check that box. That's not a savable loan. And they were pushing people out of their homes. And in our case, my mom got a phone call from the people who ended up purchasing our property. And they're a major company. And they said, I'm the lawyer for this corporation who has purchased your property and you've got 23 days to evict. And we're like, well, what? We hadn't gotten that notice yet. And so what every good millennial does when they don't know something is they Google. Right? You Google it. And so I started Googling and doing homework, like how the heck, at that time it was just a scramble mode. We packed everything we owned into horse trailers. I remember the first night leaving because they were going to chain the gates we had 2 cattle guards leading into the property, and they were gonna at midnight chain them shut. And I remember I packed my car, my Nissan Maxima, filled to the brim. I literally had like a cat and a dog in there with me. We had neighbors, thankfully, that had taken our cows and our horses. We were doing everything we could. And we left a lot of stuff behind just because we couldn't take it all. We had nowhere to go.
Wow.
And I remember that first night, I had enough money for a room at the La Quinta off I-25.
Wow.
And I'm thinking it's probably like City Center, like just north of Centennial.
Sure.
Yeah. Not at the time,
Not
it wasn't
the best
great. It wasn't the greatest. But I remember that. And my mom, she just sunk into a giant depression, as you can imagine,
sure.
you know? And the company ultimately went and bulldozed our house and our barn. Oh, I'll get emotional thinking about it. Oof.
Oh,
yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
And so you had to rebuild after that.
Yeah, you know, it was crazy because when doing all the research and talking to people, Tom Martino, actually, you know Tom Martino,
Tom Martino.
On the radio. Yeah. He was talking about this, and I kept hearing the word HAMP. HAMP, that was the program, HAMP. And it was Obama's signature housing initiative that was supposed to keep people in their homes. Well, clearly it was being abused. And as I'm hearing stories from other families around the country, I'm reading articles, and people are in the exact same boat as us.
Yeah.
They lost their home. They're kind of like, what the heck? They'd worked their whole lives. And ultimately what ended up happening, there were millions. I've heard estimates upwards of 6 million people, 6 million families that lost their home.
Wow.
Under this program. I still to this day get messages from people who have heard my story and say, you know, we've never recovered. Same thing. We lost our home.
Right.
And a judge in one of the New York circuits, there was a big class action lawsuit. We weren't a part of it, but he ended up ruling in favor of the plaintiffs. And he said, this is the greatest piece of legislative malpractice I've ever seen in my life. And what really stung me wasn't just that this had been done by, you know, Washington, you know, a bunch of, in my mind, elites in Capitol Hill had done something horrible that impacted so many families around the country. There was no repercussions, but not one of them up until that point had said anything about this program. It was like the thing that was happening that no one was talking about. And I'll never forget, in all of my research and all my things that I was trying to get around, my head wrapped around, there was one member of Congress, Patrick McHenry, from North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And he had a press release that talked about how bad and dangerous this program was. And I didn't know him from Adam's house, Kat. I didn't know who this guy was. Mm-hmm. But he was the only member of Congress in the midst of us then subsequently being homeless, you know, living in an extended stay motel in downtown Denver.
Yeah.
Not great, by the way. Do not recommend. He was the only member of Congress that I ever heard talking about it. And so fast forward, I get elected and he reaches out, he calls me, you know, to congratulate me. And I said, you don't know me and I don't know you and I'm looking forward to working with you, but I have to say thank you. And he said, for what? And I said, you were the only member of Congress who at one of the worst times of my life, you were talking about the thing that was making my life miserable. And he said, well, what was it? And I said, it was HAMP. And he said, oh my gosh. And he starts raging about this. And I was like, okay, the man knew he was trying, you know, bless him. He was just kind of like the lone wolf who was trying to take this on. Yeah.
I can still see the emotion as you're talking about it. And I mean, that's a life-changing event.
I know. Tell me a joke. Change the subject.
Okay. We will. Well, I mean, this is the problem, and we talk about this on this show all the time, is government-imposed barriers to people's success. And here you have your mother. It's a success. You're running a successful business.
Semi-successful. It's a struggle. It's a struggle.
Well, sure. It's always, it is. But a government creates this barrier, this program, that literally, had it not happened, you wouldn't have lost this range, right? You
know, it's funny because I wouldn't be in Congress. You know, I would have taken over the family business. I would have, you know, that was the dream. That was always the goal. I mean, heck, even after college, I was looking at getting into the oil and gas industry. Yeah. And it's funny because so many people have taken tragedies and made something good out of them. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, we're diverting from what we really wanted to talk about, but I do have to say, I mean, I think every American faces a moment like that, right? Where they can either get bitter and get, you know, lose it or whatever. But I'm a believer that, you know, God kind of puts you on whatever path he wants you on. Yeah. And that's kind of the path you went on. And at the end of the day, it turned out pretty well for you, I think.
I think so. Well, and to be able to give a voice to people who they went through something similar. Yeah. That's been a driver, but also as a result of what happened under that legislation, I read every bill now. And we have seen, not just under this program, but so many others where something gets snuck in, something that is tremendously profound on an industry, on a group of, you know, Americans and organization, whatever. And it's because people don't take the time to read the bill.
Sure.
And that was one of the biggest frustrations that I heard, both as a deputy chief, but as a candidate, and now again as a member. We don't have single issue bills. No one reads the bills.
Right.
And there's a tremendous frustration from people of, you don't have time to read the bill. They throw a 2,000-page bill at you and here, we're going to vote on this tomorrow morning, and it's 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
And so I know that that's a huge frustration. And my personal experience has really been foundational in, hey, team, if we get the bill at 11 o'clock at night and I'm supposed to vote on it at 8 in the morning, I'm going to vote no. I don't care what's in it. I have to be able to read that bill. And if I can't, and I'm a voracious reader, I'm very fast, but even I can't read 2,000 pages in one night.
Yeah.
And I think it's silly that in a time like this, we are still playing the games.
Yeah.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
I think that's what frustrates Americans too. And, the old saying, Nancy Pelosi, we have to pass the bill, then we can find out what's in it. But that kind of statement is just so absurd to most Americans who say, how about you do your job? We elect you to go read bills
100%.
and know what's in them and then vote yes or no on those. So kudos to you for bringing some common sense back to that process and do that. Yeah.
Well, common sense isn't common, as you know.
I know. I'm aware of that.
You know that.
One of the things, and I want to talk about this, and I really want to get to the REINS Act, which you're so great on, is we need to return to regular order in the House, right? It seems like we're getting, we're always the guns held to the head of Congress, like government's going to shut down if we don't pass this bill. And then every member just throws what they want in. And it's total chaos. And I believe that people who believe in big government intentionally led us to this point, right?
100%.
Where, we can have this Christmas tree bill where everybody just gets something and they all have to vote for it. Mm-hmm. How do we get back to where we're passing the 13 regular appropriations bills in regular order, getting Congress back to doing its job?
I have literally laid in bed at night thinking about how we do this.
Yeah.
Because most people would say, we need balanced budget amendment. Yes, we do. We need 72 hours to read the bill. I would argue even longer, truthfully, because, again, the implications of what we're doing in Washington are so far-reaching that you need to really socialize it with people that aren't on Capitol Hill, truthfully. I subscribe to the theory that you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And that's actually been a policy in our office. I'll pick up a phone and, we're voting on an energy bill. I'll call a bunch of folks that I know in the energy industry. How's this going to impact you? How's it going to impact you? How's this going to? And the feedback is always different than what I think is going to come back. Mm-hmm. And so one, you need more time. Then of course, single subject, right?
Right.
And I think earmarks is another component to all this, right?
Sure.
So earmarks traditionally had been used by leadership to kind of wrangle their members, right? It was their way to kind of keep everybody in line. And the argument that I've heard over and over is, well, Congress, which absolutely under Article 1 has control of the purse strings and needs to direct where the people's money is going, right? But the gradual ceding of authority from the legislative branch to the executive branch, and this has been decades in the making, it has now gone to, okay, we don't even pass a budget anymore. That's not even, we've really gone downhill, folks.
Yeah, right.
We do a continuing resolution with a top line number, and then the administration just kind of works it out.
Right.
And so people have said, I want my earmarks because I can spend the money better than the administration. Well, the thing that I absolutely despise about that is because when my colleagues, Republicans, say, I'm all for earmarks because I can do better than Joe Biden, I follow up with, okay, are you going to have that same policy when there's a Republican president?
Right.
And they don't have an answer. You can't have it both ways. And I think the double set of standards, the hypocrisy in Washington is one of the driving frustrations for the American people. And so in talking about how we get back to regular order, I think it is more than just establishing rules of time to read the bill, balanced budget amendment, single subject, things like that. I think it's bigger than that. I think it is getting the American people back into a civically engaged mindset where they hold those members accountable. Because through the you could go on the street and say to anyone on the sidewalk, tell me what a CR is. And I'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Most members don't even know what a CR is.
Right.
They don't know what an omnibus is. They don't know what a cromnibus is. They don't, how many people have said, dang it, why aren't you arresting this person? Why can't you hold them accountable? It's because we have gotten so far away from basic civics and understanding the process that cloudiness, that murkiness that exists in the everyday minds of Americans, and it's not their fault. It's, you're dealing with work and family, and you're just trying to live your life, like you did your part, you voted, and you wanted to send somebody who was going to do a good job. Well, good government requires eternal vigilance. And so I think the answer is not just to transform the way that Washington is, but we have to protect the institutions that have given us the structure and the three branches and really adhere to the Constitution. And I will say, I hear all the time from people, well, I like this part, but I don't like that part, or I'll advocate for that part, but I'm not going to be on that part. And I have said this at length. The Constitution is not a la carte. You don't get to pick and choose what you uphold from one day to the next.
Right.
When you put your hand on the Bible and you take the oath, you take it all. It's an all or nothing. And so my goal is to really educate people about the process, because we don't get the government that we want. We get the government that we deserve. And if people are going to stay on the sidelines and moan and complain, but not call their senators, call their members of Congress, engage, then we're going to get people who continue to ignore the American people. They're going to do what they want to do and what they're incentivized to do. Yeah. And if the general electorate is not engaging with their member, what is the incentive for that member to listen to them? So that's really where I have come to the conclusion, all 3 years in Congress that I have spent, that the way back is through the people. I really have a belief in the concept of we the people. Yeah. I think we have far greater power than we realize, and we just have to exercise it. And my goal is to help people understand how to do that.
So, and hence your affiliation with a group like Americans for Prosperity, right? That is a grassroots organization that tries to help connect citizens with their government and help them understand that our founders intended us to have limited government. But it's so important. One of the biggest dangers, man, we're so far off topic where we were going to go. We were going to talk about the REINS Act. We are going to talk about that.
We are going to talk about it because it's very important.
I promise. But, there are so many people these days, and I guess it's always been this way, and it drives me crazy when I hear someone say, they're all crooks. They're all evil. Yeah. They're all that. Yeah. To me, that's giving up on America, right? Yeah. That is literally giving up on America. Sure, there's some crooks. Oh, yeah. And the media is going to focus on the 1 or 2 or 3 that are crooks, right? Yeah. They're going to tell those stories. They're not going to tell the stories of, the hero, or they're not going to tell your story, the story you just told, right? Of an average, ordinary citizen who said, you know what, enough's enough, and ended up running for Congress and getting elected. The media is not going to highlight that story. But we can't have people give up on the system and say, well, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to pay attention to it. We're $34 trillion in debt. Yep. People have to pay attention if they care and love their country.
It's an existential threat.
Right.
And I tell people, when I was on the campaign trail, it was always a bit of a ding being the young one in the race. I was, I think 31 ish. I don't know. But I was in a 12-way primary. And I was the young one and I was the woman, and everyone said, run on being young and run on being a woman. I said, absolutely not. I want people to vote for me because I'm the best person for the job, not because I check a certain box, right? And they said, well, what does that mean to you when, why are you in this fight then? And I said, because the decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. are impacting my generation the most. My generation, the Gen Zs, we are going to shoulder the $34 trillion in debt. Our kids and our grandkids are going to shoulder that debt. And so it's very easy for people who don't have to live with the consequences of it. Their children and their grandchildren will, but it's a tough thing, because when people want to sit down and talk about government funding and government spending, everyone has their pet project, right? And no one wants to be the bad guy. And so you get every group under the sun that comes up and says, well, we really need that program. Right. Do you hate the environment? Do you hate puppy dogs? You must hate children. And it's like everyone comes in. But we are living in a time where no one has taken a serious look at what we're spending and why we're spending. And the thing that I say often is we can cut, we can cap, but until we change the way that Washington does business, we'll just end right back up here.
Yeah.
And that's why the REINS Act is so important.
Yeah.
And everything that I have done in my first and second term has been around the effort to address the administrative state, as people kindly put it, but I call it the regulatory regime because it is a regime. It is the fourth branch of government that we never wanted.
Right.
Right. And people don't realize the power that the nameless, faceless bureaucrats that dwell in basements all over Washington have.
Right.
Right. The people who really have had no industry experience. They went from, college to an internship in an agency, and then all of a sudden they're regulating an industry that they've never worked in.
Sure.
And it's dangerous because it takes away the voice of the people. Because you can't find these people, you can't fire these people, you can't hold them accountable in any other way than the power of the purse.
Right.
And that's why REINS Act is so important. For folks wondering, REINS is regulations in need of scrutiny. That's what it stands for, because it is all about returning accountability and transparency back to the American people and really empowering the voice through their representative.
Yeah. Congresswoman, you would be a good podcast host, because this podcast host didn't actually get to the REINS Act, which is what we were going to talk about, but you did.
I'm your wing woman.
I mean, why am I here? I can just walk out and you can interview yourself. You can ask the question. This is awesome.
No, I'm trying to be a good wing woman.
You are. You're doing awesome. That's so true. I do. Okay, now we're on to the REINS Act.
We're on the REINS Act.
And how important that is.
Yes.
So you talked about this group of faceless bureaucrats who really run the country. Some of them have been there for decades. They've been in their jobs for decades, and they're making these decisions that our founding fathers never intended them to make.
Yes.
Right? Our founding fathers intended that to be Article 1, the most important article of the Constitution itself, in my view. Right? The strongest.
That's why it's number one.
That's why it's number one. The elected representatives, that's where they wanted the power to reside. They wanted you to be accountable as a member of Congress. They wanted you to vote on whether or not they could ban stoves, gas stoves. They wanted you to vote on whether or not refrigerators should be, taken away and we go back to the Stone Age or whatever the plan is here. Those are the things our founders wanted. But it's gotten so out of kilter. So talk about the REINS Act and why you introduced it.
So the REINS Act, as I said, regulations in need of scrutiny. And the reason why it's so important is because today, regulations control every aspect of our life. The hotel that we're currently in,
right?
They abide by an insane amount of regulations. The microphone that was right in front of me was manufactured and probably cost twice the price that it should have because of the manufacturing regulations. Because we all know that as regulations incur more costs in business and production, it doesn't get absorbed, it gets passed down to the consumer. So ultimately, the regulations are impacting your wallet as well as your lifestyle and your general economy, your community. Now, I'm not saying that we have to be anti-regulation across the board. There are some very good regulations that protect us and, make sure that we drink, clean water and, things like that. But when you have the Federal Register that dedicates an entire chapter to regulating the size of spaghetti, quite literally the diameter.
Really?
Yes. If you put spaghetti on a box and it is not exactly 0.11, I think centimeters, metric system, Americans, we don't do it.
We're Americans. Yeah, thank you.
If you don't have it exact, it's a fine. It is a federal crime.
For manufacturers of spaghetti?
Yes. There's a whole chapter dedicated to regulating the diameter of spaghetti. I mean, and that's just a silly one, but I mean, you think about the impact on industry as a whole. So I'll use the ATF, for example. The last decade, the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, they have said that accessories are not under their purview to regulate. Well, we all have been very, keenly aware of the pistol brace issue, where a lot of disabled veterans who want to go out and exercise their Second Amendment rights, they use a pistol brace. I've used a pistol brace. It's a great stabilizer, but it is an accessory. It's literally, you can 3D print them. Some of them are rubber, and it's like Velcro straps. It's just It's something very basic. It is not a weapon in itself. Well, the ATF under Joe Biden's administration comes out and says, you have to register that, and we'll waive the $250 registration fee in this time block. But you need to have a serial number. You need to register it. And if you don't, it's a felony.
Incredible.
And so I went to several of my local firearms folks and started doing my homework. And really, we worked with different organizations, cooked up an economic impact report on what this is going to do in terms of just the pistol braces on the firearms industry. It is a $6 billion hit to the 2A community.
Yeah.
Not only that, but overnight, if you didn't register and send yours back, your pistol brace back to the manufacturer where they put a serial number on it and register it and do that whole thing, you were made to be a felon overnight. No due process. And so you take the economic hit of $6 billion plus the constitutional concerns.
Sure.
And that was all done with the stroke of a pen through the regulatory process.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Then, of course, look at WOTUS, Waters of the U.S., another major regulation where it basically defines any area as seasonably wet. And again, I'm in Florida. We get 58 to 62 inches of rain on average.
Right.
My front yard is seasonably wet year round, They said any area that is seasonably wet is subject to the Army Corps of Engineers jurisdiction because that is now navigable. I will tell you, my front yard is not navigable. It is not navigable.
Right.
And the impact that people say, oh, well, that's just ridiculous. Like no one's actually that's not going to impact anything. Think about the development that was hampered as a result. Agriculture, putting up a fence, fixing a fence, all of a sudden became almost like a federal crime.
Yeah.
Because you would be in violation of WOTUS. So it didn't matter if you were in construction, if you were in agriculture, hospitality, every single industry was impacted by the regulation that we all know as WOTUS. I looked at a map once and Iowa would have completely been under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps. And anyone who has ever had to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers, God bless you. I'll say a prayer for you. It is one of the most onerous processes that you can go through, and expensive too. And so it's just, people don't realize how everything in their life, from the coffee that they drink, the car that they drive, the roads that they're driving on, the schools that they send their kids to, all these regulations are contributing to more and more red tape. And they're effectively taking away your voice because as it stands, the administration we have one tool in the toolbox, a CRA, and it really is just it's hardly ever exercised effectively or used. Mm-hmm. So we have no way to get these bureaucrats other than to defund their departments.
Right.
What we want to do and what REINS does is it takes any regulation that has $100 million of industry impact or more, and it has to come back to Congress for an up or down vote. That's putting the power back in the people's hands because you're a member of Congress, you can fire. I call them Congress critters. We're all Congress critters. You can fire them.
Right.
You can call them up and you can yell at them. You can bless them. You can do all those things. You can't do that to a bureaucrat. And so it should be your representative saying yay or nay to something like that, right?
Yeah, it should be. So, Article 1 lays out the responsibilities of the legislative branch. Will the courts help us in this area? Because obviously we need the Supreme Court and the federal court system to kind of rein back what has happened in the executive branch. Mm-hmm. But as the courts do it, so too does Congress. Congress needs to go in and grab some of their authority back. This balancing act is what our founders devised, right? When they devised this wonderful Constitution of ours. Any thoughts on what the court might do in this session or future sessions to help in that regard? Well,
and of course, the West Virginia case that we saw last year, that was big.
The EPA case.
Yeah, the EPA case, and Chevron, everyone's talking about that right now because that really is laying out what is going to essentially be the building blocks. We have the case with the fishermen, right? And that regulation. My personal instinct is that the Supreme Court will rule in favor of Article 1 authority, and they will say that the executive branch does not have the authority to regulate in this way. Because what we've seen, and some people have said that this is a stretch too far? I don't think so. We have witnessed a growing imperial presidency, right? Where the White House, the president wants to be the legislator, write the laws, want to execute the laws, but then also be judge and jury of them.
And we see that whether it's a Republican or a Democrat
100%.
president, right?
I am an equal opportunity offender in this regard. So Republicans and Democrats have been equally guilty of this. So yes, I think the Supreme Court, and just knowing what I have read and people who have spoken to, I think this year, particularly this summer when many of the rulings come out, we're going to see a revert back to very much an interpretation in a very black and white way, which is good because we need that power to go back to Article 1, the legislative branch. That rebalance is going to be key because, again, it was never intended for the Supreme Court to be, basically being the final, they don't want to craft legislation. And there are very dangerous precedents that are set if we continue to allow the executive to run unfettered. So,
well, and
I'm encouraged.
Good. Well, for the Constitution to work, everyone has to stay in their lane, right? And so that's really important. And so legislators have to legislate. Judges shouldn't legislate, but should do the things that they're doing.
We don't need any more activism
exactly
on the
right.
bench.
Yeah, that's right. Well, listen, it's an amazing story. Thanks for being with us and for telling the story. Thanks for all you're doing on the REINS Act, and it's I think it's fascinating for people to listen to this show, understand that you're just an ordinary person, right? That got elected to Congress. You're not a Rockefeller, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm just Kat.
All right. Thanks a lot for being with us. You bet.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Well, listen, what an inspiring story. And I hope that if you can share this story with, that little 6-year-old girl, that little 6-year-old boy, to see, what? This is the only country. America is literally the only country where you can have what a Congresswoman Cammack did happen to them, right? Is to grow up as an ordinary citizen. Most countries, if you want to be the leader or you want to be a member of the parliament or the Congress, you have to be born into those kind of bloodlines. That's not true here in America. This is still the most blessed and greatest country on the face of the earth. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.